Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Francis Scott Key. I'll make a couple general remarks, but first let me introduce our board president, Mr. Dolan, who in turn will introduce the board members who are here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. The board members will be in the audience and listening to everything tonight and the dialogue back and forth. We have over here Mrs. Rothschild, Mrs. Harrison, and Bob Lord.
Okay. For those, some of you have been to town meetings before and know sort of forum and the process we use. Others have not. And welcome to a town meeting. This is different than citizen participation at a board meeting in that the intent of a town meeting is to have an open dialogue with myself, the board president, ask questions about school system, express concerns, express feelings. I can tell by the shirts there's a lot of people here who are interested in the school's closure and redistricting process, and that's fine. I do want to state, and I've told, I don't know how many by email, this is not a hearing on school closures or redistricting. Okay, that's not what this is. We're welcome to hear comments, but I'm not going to actively debate or discuss those things, and I'll tell you why, because since I see a lot of shirts out there espousing one particular school over another or trying to keep one school open, let me tell you how we'll handle that, and let me talk about the process. You certainly want to hear your comments and all comments. Where we are in the process is the Board of Education has received a report from the Boundary Adjustment Committee. They have not sent anything out for public comment because I have not made a recommendation to the board to do that. Where we are in the process is the board and I are asking questions in public session because that's the only place it can take for the forum. This is a public process. So all the conversations that the board is having with the Boundary Adjustment Committee is you're hearing the questions as they're asking them. There are no closed door meetings. The board was not engaged with the Boundary Adjustment Committee before they received their recommendations in an open meeting. And so they're in the process of trying to understand the recommendations, the rationale for this potential school closures and redistricting, offering their input, their comments, sending the committee back to review and answer those questions or come up with different options or answer the concerns that board members have. And I am engaged in the same process. Now I have more of a luxury because I'm not an elected official and I don't have to have a public meeting. I can meet with the Boundary Adjustment Committee differently than the board can. So I engage in that process as well. And some of those questions and options I share at board meetings and some I share and get feedback on my concerns. But the process is this, is Mr. Dolan or board members today are not going to engage in any discussion to defend any recommendation of the Boundary Adjustment Committee because we haven't made that decision yet. I haven't made the recommendation. Once I make my recommendation, then I become the person who has to justify that to the Board of Education and discuss any rationale that you might want to hear for my decisions. That's where we are. So we're welcome comments. I'll take comments on questions. I'll take comments on composition of the committee, which is mine. I'll take questions on process. I'll take questions on timelines. All of those things I'll answer. But what I won't answer is why this school and not that school. Now, as far as, again, the open forum, there's no cards. There's no 3-minute limitation. There is conversation within that framework that I just laid out. The only time limit that we'll set is not one issue will dominate the entire meeting because there's lots of people here with lots of opinions. I assume you're here to either to hear or share opinions. And there may be some people here that want to talk about things other than potential school closure or boundary line adjustments. So that's sort of what I'll lay out. There is no agenda other than that. So, Mr. Dolan, any comments or anything?
No, I think we just, for me and the mic, I've got a pretty loud voice. It's a chance for not only about redistricting, but anyone else, and that's why we move them all around the county. And we have these interactions with people. A lot of times there are many issues that come up. And of course this year, obviously, the one on most people's mind are the possibility of closures and redistricting and that stuff. But there are other issues that people have at these town meetings in regards to budget, in regards to process, in regards to programs, whatever. And so it's an open dialogue on all topics and not just for this. Because we are, if Mr. Guthrie gets to the point of making a recommendation to the Board of Education of a particular proposal or an option, then we'll go out for public hearings, and there'll be at least 4 of those where they'll be dedicated only just for that option and to the board to hear from the public again in regards to all of that. And so just to let you know, the process is when and if we get to that point, then there'll be an announcement of at least 4 regional public hearings, and that will be the dialogue at that point, back and forth, hearing your comments in regards to the option or options that the superintendent brings to the board at that time.
Who would like to go first? Yes, sir.
Maybe?
You can.
So I do have a question about the process for the BAC. In reviewing the documents online, there was an MGT study 2 years ago, and I'm concerned about the difference between the MGT facility capacity versus the SRC, which is state-rated capacity. Oh, by the way, my name is John Humphrey. I do live in Mount Airy. I have a daughter who will start kindergarten next year, and I also am a public school teacher in a neighboring jurisdiction. I've been teaching for 18 years. So I'm kind of approaching this not just as a parent, but from the perspective of a teacher who teaches in the classroom. So when I looked at the SRC originally in the BAC report, I was thinking numbers, rooms, numbers, but how is the space used? And then I went back and realized that I had access to the MGT study, which makes reference to the SRCs and the MGT capacity, where the MGT group went through and did a different formula to more, as they explained in the documents, more appropriately assess the utilization according to the educational programs being implemented in the schools. But when I go to the BAC report, where it shows all the SRC capacities, there's no reference to the actual numbers from the MGT. It looks like that document with the utilization is being ignored, and I don't understand why the BAC's document does not make any reference to those numbers. And when you look at all the elementary schools in general, there's only one elementary school in the county on the MGT report that came in as inefficient usage, which is Robert Moton. And a lot of the schools districted for closure are up in the, right now in the 90s and don't dip below the mid 80s, some of them. So can anybody explain why we're not doing the MGT? Okay.
Thank you. A couple terms that I'll try to explain is the SRC, state-rated capacity. That's the number that we use. The MGT study, which was done 2 years ago, and I'll give you a little history on the study and why we got there, used a different calculation. They used a utilization calculation, which basically says, okay, you have this functional capacity. There are 3 different capacity figures that they used in the study. One was a functional capacity, that's a local rated capacity. Another one is a state-rated capacity, which is what the state says you can hold within your school. And MGT invented something new for us called a utilization capacity, and that is that they walked through all the schools, they looked at how the schools were being used, and they came up with a different rated capacity based on the breakout spaces that principals were using for the benefit of their students, instructional students. So the question is, okay, why did we move away from that? And why wasn't that addressed in the Boundary Line Adjustment Committee's report? Well, I recommended to the board, the last time we went through this, which was really tail end of 2013 and beginning of 2012. And for those of you that may not have been following this for the 5 years that I've been superintendent, I've been talking about potential school closures for a long time. I've been here at this school, as well as all other high schools and service community clubs, organizations, talking about my concern of a continued drop in enrollment, how that's related to funding, and I charged the committee in 2012 with looking at potential school closures. Before we got to that point, and I looked at the committee's report, and then I worked with the board, and we hired a consultant to come in and look at it. What's happened since then? So to get to the heart of the question is we've had 2 more years of enrollment continuing to drop. So in other words, the 2 more years of enrollment projections not only showed a further decrease in students, or more significant decrease in students, the recovery, where 2 years ago was in the out years, and we saw in 2020 and 2021 enrollments flattening out and then rising again. Now, in last year's projections and what I expect to be worth in next year's projections, which we'll get in January, there is no recovery within the cycle. So it's not only didn't we recover, it's more students we're going to lose over the course of the next 10 years, and there is no recovery. It's just a slow flattening. So that doesn't, with 2 more years of projections, that's one factor. The other factor is the finances of the school system don't have a thing to do with utilization, the numbers from NGT. We are getting over $12 million in the last 6 years. We've lost less money from the state, and the expectation that the county can make all of that up is just not going to happen. And so while the utilization number that NGT used is an interesting number, I can't use it to get more money. I can't use it to pay bills. And so while it's only a good number to use if it correlates, my opinion, if it correlates specifically to revenue, and it doesn't. And so that number may be true on the utilization point, but it doesn't relate to the number I need to pay the bills. And as I said many times, we're at a point now where I can't continue to cut the instructional program or the discretionary spending that we have within our budget to pay for non-discretionary spending. So ideally, I would love to use that number, but I can't.
Can I just make a comment?
A quick one, yeah.
Of course, I don't envy you. I think it's between a rock and a hard place. And I truly respect the difficulty and the challenges of the decision. You're absolutely right. It's a money problem. My concern is that when we're ignoring, I won't say ignoring, but we're not using MGT, where are we going to put all these kids if the MGT is saying that the space is actually being used, where the SRC makes it look like the space isn't being used? I know the money's not there, but where are the kids going to go, and what sacrifices will be made countywide to squeeze these kids in the building into rooms that are actually, according to MGT, being better used than the SRC would make it think?
For me, the better argument or the better question is how am I going to sustain an excellent educational system without the revenue to support it? And so it's another end of the same question. For me, it is, okay, I need to enhance my instructional program. I don't have the revenues to do it. Mr. Boone, any next? Reed? I'll get to you next. Reed?
My name is background, so I'm going to stand up and actually put some thoughts down so I don't ramble on. But I've been trying, as many of you know, I've been badgering you for the last 15 years about the school system. But just when I think that progress has been made and there's some method to the madness of school funding, I find things veer way out of control. The direction that you're heading, the options that you're considering, your unexpected, stubborn, and seemingly arbitrary insistence on immediately closing 5 schools and redistricting nearly 30% of Carroll's children, I feel is very much off track. Don't get me wrong, I understand how hard CCPS and most of you have worked on the board, to reduce inefficiencies in spending and still keep up with inflation and the need to improve educational programs. And I've been aware of the problems in funding formulas that have been used both at the state and the local levels. I've been impressed with the progress that's been made to develop better capital improvement plans, to place the school system in the best position to maintain adequate educational facilities for the vast majority of our children, while still protecting tax dollars and the public's investment throughout as student enrollments and the housing markets change. But what I can't understand is why you're considering abandoning all of that methodology, all of the progress that's been made without an honest fight. Others have explained some of the most obvious flaws in the back methodology, and I think they will point that out again, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But the options being considered, I think, would make sense if our county was facing a real crisis in student enrollment. I come from a medical background, so the word crisis has its root in medicine, where it means a turning point of a disease indicating either recovery or death. As far as I can see, there's no crisis in student enrollment across Carroll County. After ridiculously rapid growth, we, like other jurisdictions around us, hit a limit. And unfortunately, some of our enrollments continue to drop a bit below that limit, while enrollments in neighboring counties have increased. Just as administering the wrong medication or the right medication at the wrong dose can kill a patient, responding inappropriately to recent drops in student enrollment can have a devastating effect. Instead of preserving or improving the quality of education as each of you were elected to do on the board, option 2, 3, and 4 will create a real crisis that I feel will send CCPS over the edge. Closing fully functional schools which operate efficiently in communities like Mount Airy and others, which are poised to support residential and economic development because of access to public water, roads, employment opportunity, commercial activity, emergency services, and recreation. It'll tear those communities apart. It'll disrupt the lives of thousands of families and undermine the ability of the county to recover its tax base, which will invariably cripple revenue streams. Allowing this to happen will erode public faith in you and in our public schools. So I'm here to urge you to stand, and in the weeks and months to come, to urge you to stand together, to continue to work quickly and openly with the public and our newly elected Board of County Commissioners, I saw some of them here, and insist that funding be provided to Carroll County Public Schools at a level that will allow us to retain our teachers as you continue to develop a more reasonable plan for redistricting and closure. A plan that will close only those schools that are clearly underutilized and or in desperate need of modernization and repair, as per time-tested criteria that are outlined in state guidelines and supported by the mature data that you've generated and have been presented in your master plans and in the MGT report. I believe this will place Carroll in the best position to support education now and as more young families with children start coming back. Thanks.
Thank you.
You heard the board in several meetings talk about the fact, and really you just said it's sending us over the edge. I think we're already there. I think we've been hanging on by our fingernails for the last 5 years at least. And part of that was the economy going down, and part of that was we didn't move forward at all in regards to that. We are now the lowest starting teacher salary in the state of Maryland. Our teachers can leave and go to the surrounding contiguous counties next to us for as much as $20,000 for the same experience. We're not retaining our teachers as we had in the past. We're not able to recruit like we did in the past. I would say we're already on that edge and starting to fall off that. And at this point, that's why where we are in that situation is, it is two issues that I see that at some point we're going to have to do something, regardless of what, if we come up with the option. One is, we had, I think, 31,000 seats in our school system when we were 29,000. We're at 25,500. So we're 6,000 seats down, basically. And we're going to go down, by what Mr. Guthrie just said, by at least another 4,000 in the next few years. So we're 10 to 11,000 seats down. But at that point, we can meet the educational needs, but we also had needs financially that absolutely are not there from, and we've talked about the state, the county, and the federal, but the federal's so small amount. It's really state, and we've been cut by the state because of our enrollment going down. And unless that formula changes, hold harmless, those kind of things, that will continue, as well as inflationary costs keep going up. So you're right, the board and the superintendent are, I think someone said, between a hard place and a rock. That's exactly where we are now. Is the future going to be at least working towards something and getting out of that? You heard the public meetings we've had with our county commissioners. This is the first time in at least the last 5 years that we've had open dialogue in public together and trying to come up with a joint form or way of getting to the point of providing properly for our Carroll County school system. It's not an easy task for them. It's not going to be an easy task for the taxpayers. It's not going to be an easy task for whatever. We're talking major money. When you run the school system, and almost 87% of our total budget is salaries, and we're one of the lowest in the state. That tells you that in order to increase that, we've talked about our board has a clear-cut goal of competitive salaries, or at least competitive from this point forward. Our teachers historically have gotten what is called a step and maybe a COLA. They haven't had that step. They had one in the last 6 or 7 years. Other counties have made up that step, whatever reason, where they got their finance, whatever. So we're always going to be behind. And we've worked with the county government, and we're still working with them. We have a committee between the board and the county government to come up with a finance plan for 5 years. So that we're not in this point every year looking for extra money and that kind of stuff as well as a plan. We're hoping to finalize that in the next few weeks to a month at the most, come up with a public 5-year plan together. And that's not going to be the answer all. That's just a way to move forward from this point, hopefully, and not that we can never make up. And retaining teachers and experienced teachers is a great issue for us. So whenever we get into these kind of dialogues, it's 2 issues. It's one, the seats, it's second, the money, it's third, where do we go from here and what's the school system going to look like? So my fear, and I spent 35 years in public education and retired from this school system in 2010, this is the worst shape I've ever seen us in regards to financial situation and where we're going and the loss of teachers and experienced teachers. That's unbelievable. So every board member I know is committed to provide what's best for our students and what's best for our entire school system. And that's going to be some tough roads no matter which way we go from here, no matter what decisions are made. It's a tough road. And I guess one of my requests to all of you is that we have public budget hearings every year. I would like to see this kind of support for our public budget for the Carroll County Public Schools, which we have never had in the past. And we will have public meetings, and we might have 6, 8, maybe even 25 or 30 people show up for a public hearing, and we've requested that every year. So I would like you to take this energy, and that's my personal request to you, and that is from this point forward, when the public school system goes out for a public budget, please organize your communities and come out and support that, and let everyone know that this is important to our whole school system, because that's a message we got to send.
It's your choice.
But I did actually speak at the board meeting last week, so thank you again for this opportunity. I haven't really prepared anything like I did last time, but just, okay.
They want you to use
So I guess I can use the mic. So I appreciate everything that you just said, Mr. Doolin, and I completely agree with you. We need to pay our teachers more. We're in a bit of a financial, I won't say crisis, but to use a less technical term, a pickle. And how do we figure this out? The problem that I have with the recommendations that have been put forward is that the actions that we would be taking don't meet the outcome that we need, right? We're looking to save $7.2 million of operating costs. Once you factor in offsets, that number gets pretty small, maybe 2 to 3 million, maybe, and let's say you don't even include offsets, but we're basically saying we're going to save $23 million of maintenance expenses, right, on some of these schools. But a year later, we're going to go back to the commissioners and say, we need $50 million to do East Middle. We need another $50 million to do West Middle. We need $97 million to go do the new Career and Tech Center. We need 30-ish million for William Winchester. It's not going to work. It's really difficult to justify closing good condition schools when all we're going to do is turn around and say, well, now we need boatloads of money to fix up the poor condition schools. So I think the community needs to see a recommendation that actually looks at closing the end-of-life schools. We know that there may be some disadvantages to it. You know, you may look at it and say, oh, well, this creates some problems here, or this creates some problems in that direction, but I think we need to see a proposal that actually looks at closing the end-of-life schools, because we've got a small subcommittee kind of looking at these numbers, doing lots of financial calculations and everything based on information that's in the BAC report. And we think it can be done. We think there's a way to do it. There's going to be some disadvantages, but I think that that's an option that needs to be put on the table, because right now there aren't really any options. There's one choice that's been provided, and it's the same choice, for at least for elementary schools, in every option. So I think we need a recommendation that gives us some choices.
that's a very common input, feedback that the board and I get. And so let me categorize that, and I thank you for your comments. A lot of what we're getting falls into two camps. One is, why aren't you looking at severely undercapacity schools as defined by 70 or 75% less than the capacity of that school? So that's one group of feedback we're getting. You're crazy for not looking at just these schools. It's less student movement. It makes sense. Then the other camp is along that line. It makes more sense for you to look at end-of-life schools. I don't know what that term means, end-of-life, because we have schools that are, I think another decade. But it means, to me, schools that need the most capital improvements to continue to run. Okay. So having that public feedback, one of the conversations I'm having with the BAC is to say, the board has a work session coming up on the 26th. And so I plan to ask those questions publicly and have the board or the BAC respond to the board, because the board's getting the same questions and has the same kind of concerns and expressing those concerns to me. So this is not new. And so hopefully at the board work session, we can bring all of those things out. Okay, why did the committee recommend these 5 schools and exclude those schools with the highest capital costs or the lowest enrollment capacities, and have more of a full round of discussion. So that will be televised. We talked about that work session. It's the 26th at 5:30. It is in the boardroom. Seating will be limited. It is not citizen participation, but it will be broadcast. It is the time for the board, superintendent, staff to sit down and have these kinds of dialogues, and my hope is to bring out those kinds of questions. Why or why not? So hopefully we can address some of those. Why don't we go in the back? Gray sweatshirt, purple shirt. Or I'm sorry, burgundy shirt.
Hi. I am from Wintersville High School. I'm a teacher there. I'm going to make a comment. I don't need a response, but I just want to tell sort of a little bit of the story of our school. 23% of our students qualify for free or reduced meals. A lot of my kids are homeless. This is their home. This is a place that they have a family where they belong. It's not about losing a football team for us. It's not about losing our building. It's about these kids losing their family, and the only place where they are loved and accepted and people believe in them. So, thank you.
Thank you. You're way back. Yes, you, sir. No, you. Good question, Bob. Yes, you vote. The answer to the first question is there is no timeline associated with any recommendations. That will be part of my recommendation to the board. And the other question is there going to be a larger forum or area? And let me address that. I tried to address that by putting out a press release and sending emails out. The last meeting was a board public meeting. Those are televised. Tried to say this is not a meeting to hear input, although it's certainly allowed, and accommodating people I know is an issue. Once I make my recommendation to the Board of Education and the board endorses sending whatever options out for public comment, we will have, as Mr. Doolin said, we will have 4 regional meetings. They'll be in this size place, so hopefully everybody will be able to attend one of those meetings. And so we'll have over 8 hours dedicated just to hearing your input, feedback. I will take all of that and make a decision whether I want to change my final recommendation to the board. As far as the timeline goes, I will tell you the earliest would be next school year. The latest would be probably the following school year before any of the implementations are ready to go through. Okay? Let's get somebody from over here. Yes.
Finksburg area. I've been an accountant for 40 years, lived in Carroll County for 40 years. My question, sir, is why haven't the commissioners considered just some type of a property tax increase to get us past this?
That was my question for 5 years. So I endorse that question. We were asking that as the school, and said we're working with the funding committee. So yes, I agree completely. I would not like to be in this position. And let me tell you, at the chamber meeting, one of the things that we also did as the superintendent of Board of Education is we did contract with a group to study the return on investment for public education. Many of you, especially the mayors, are coming to us and say, hey, our school is the economic engine of our community. Without that school, we're going to lose the economic ability to grow and businesses and all those things. I know that. I certainly know going into that what you're saying is true. It doesn't help me with the funds that I need, but I certainly know it's a reality. But anyway, one of the things that the Beacon report showed was that there is this like a 72-cent return on for, excuse me, it's 72 is the capital return, 44 for every dollar. So the economic engine is not just within any individual school, it's within the whole system itself. It makes a county viable. People move into a county for a number of reasons. One of those are good schools, another one is affordable housing. Transportation is another reason, and things to do are the reasons that people move into the county. But that's not been happening. We've been facing a reduction in student population since 2005. We started making those reductions in 2009, with staff following in 2010. And let me talk a little bit about that, because I've read some emails about, well, why didn't you start cutting in 2005, or why did you hire more staff, or why do you have more staff in 2009 than you got in 2002? Well, they're forgetting about there's several things that happened during that time period. One is the state of Maryland funding formula changed to provide school systems with what they termed to be adequate and equitable funding. Carroll County was a recipient of about $15–16 million more a year in funding from 2002 to 2008 that wasn't contingent on number of students. So we were insulated from the first beginning of student enrollment drops in 2005. It really didn't hit us until 2009. But also, full-day kindergarten came into place, a whole lot of state mandates, and that was 100 staff members just there we had to add to implement full-day kindergarten over a 3-year period. So the integrated test management, AEDs, there's lots of things that came into place that were staff were required. So the legislature gave us money, but then basically passed all of these mandates to make us spend that money in a certain way. So that's sort of the history of why we might have more staff in 2010 than we had in 2003, is the comparisons that I've heard. But if you do a comparison from 2010 to 2015, we're down almost 300 staff members, because that's where I've been taking the cuts. So the answer is, to your assertion, is why didn't we address this over the 5 years? I've been fighting, you saw me, those of you who were tuned in, I've been fighting at every budget hearing meeting for more funding. We set a goal to solve the issues we have with funding, give our employees proper compensation increases, and every year that funding has not been met because the priorities of the county at those times were different. And there was an interest in reducing the tax base to attract more businesses, and there was an interest in forcing us, quite frankly, on the part of some commissioners to downsize. So that's the short answer, but I agree with you. I've been fighting for that ever since. But anyway, back to the Beacon study. There is a chamber meeting. I know some of you may be members of the chambers. The Beacon group is coming into the chambers to do the same presentation on the Beacon study, and hopefully that will have some effect on the business community, that we are a business entity in this county, and we are an economic engine for county growth. So I'm certainly aware of that, and I appreciate the comment. Yes, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen and board members. We handed out some material, and I'm going to ask you to retrieve this piece from what we handed out to you, if possible. My name is Bill Butts. I'm a Mount Airy resident. I'm a former vice president of marketing and business development for Time Warner. For the past 10 years, I've been a financial advisor and retirement income planner, and I'm proud to say that I'm chair of the Mount Airy Planning Commission. I want to take a minute tonight and speak as a citizen planner about what I view as the long-term need in this situation for our county to use positive measures such as economic development and revenue growth, which I think all of us would prefer over tax increases, along with expense reduction to create a long-term solution to the county's school enrollment and funding challenges. Quite simply, and this will be my point number one, Mount Airy is an economic driver for Carroll County. The chart that I passed out is based upon information that we retrieved from each of the incorporated municipalities in the county, as well as the tax revenue for each of those communities. What it shows us is the actual annual amount of tax revenue that's contributed by each of the incorporated areas. It also shows us the actual households in each of those communities. And I need to admit to you that in Mount Airy's case, we're only showing 60% of our households because we contribute to another county as well. 40% of our households and our tax revenue go to Frederick County. So that chart lines up all of the communities so we can look at households, we can look at annual tax revenue, and we can see those ratios. It's not to be a qualitative measure, it's simply to point out the contribution, the significant contribution that Mount Airy makes. And what it amounts to is that Mount Airy is currently contributing $8.5 million a year to Carroll County. On a per capita basis, per household basis, it's close to twice other communities. We're blessed in that regard. Per the Board of Education's own data, it costs a little more than $1 million a year, fully loaded, to operate Mount Airy Elementary School per year. By the way, that's the second lowest operating cost of any elementary school in the county. Therefore, with Mount Airy's $8.5 million a year in tax revenue that we contribute, we're actually paying the freight for our own local elementary school and the equivalent of 7 more schools as well. We want the Board of Education and we want the county commissioners to recognize that Mount Airy is an economic driver for the county. But wait, there's more. That gaudy $8.5 million figure has every opportunity to grow even higher. And I want to talk to you about that. That's point number 2. In real estate, the subtitle is location, location, location. Mount Airy is strategically located directly adjacent to highways 27, 70, and 270. That's part of the reason in the 90s it was the fastest growing community in the state. Actually, our growth was a little bit too fast because we got slapped on the wrist because we started permitting too much in advance of our water capacity. As a result, the Maryland Department of the Environment put Mount Airy under a consent order. It scaled back our water allocation, and we in turn had to screw down our annual permitting building limits, okay? As a result, that period, essentially the last 10 to 12 years, has been a period of very conservative growth for Mount Airy. It's also the period of time which your residential growth and student enrollment projections are based upon. That's part of the reason that we feel strongly your projections for PARs in Mount Airy Elementary are more than likely understated. The town has just completed an update to our master plan. It took us 4 years to do it. We're very, very proud of it. It contains a vision and an integrated plan for the town's land use, its development, and our overall enhancement of our town. It's based on in-depth surveys with our residents, groups, and leaders. It utilizes partnered input from every single one of the town's commissions. The land use priorities in that plan center on our vacant infill areas within the town's borders, especially adjacent to our downtown, And our priorities are the town's continued economic development, the revitalization of our downtown area, and pursuing other potentially productive opportunities, such as an office park and employment campus that we're partnering with the county to take a look at on the north edge of Mount Airy. In support of these priorities and objectives, the town has developed 2 brand new zoning districts. A mixed-use district, an MXD, that has a commercial zone, but with a residential component, and of course, an office park employment zone as well. Both of these ordinances have been
We
drafted.
have a lot of people here. I didn't intend presentations, so
Okay.
if you could just sort of summarize.
All right. We've also hired a new Main Street manager. Our Economic Development Commission has engaged a marketing consultant to help us with our branding and our promotion capabilities. We are adjacent to Frederick County. They have approved in the last 18 to 24 months the equivalent of 2 Mount Airies, which will be built in the next 15 to 20 years. We're poised to attract our share of those new residents to our downtown area, okay? So we can convince them to leave part of those dollars locally. That's additional tax revenue. I won't get into, well, I will briefly, because there's one last problem. It's point 3. It's called the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance, Mount Airy's APFO, okay? And you may be aware that it says if you don't have adequate local school capacity, you can't proceed with development.
What is your capacity? What is your APFO cutoff?
100%.
Why isn't it 120 like the counties?
I don't know that.
But that can be changed to 120.
Well, perhaps, but,
I'm just going to say there's this discrepancy. You're more restrictive than the county. Absolutely.
all right? So in conclusion, for the sake of smart planning and management, in order to build a long-term solution and to support some critically needed revenue growth for the county, we would ask you to please slow down and rethink the best options to deal with this situation.
Thank you. Okay, others. Let's have the way over here. Andy.
I thought about it, I think you all hear me. I'm not gonna argue the merits of any one school or the rest. We all think our schools are great, we all think they're the best, we all think that's not gonna happen, right? 11,000 seats not gonna be saved. My question to you guys is, do you go back and retrospectively look at this and say, where did we go wrong? Commissioners, school board, you said we're in a rock and a hard place. With the commissioners and your board, previous board, you guys put yourself in this place. Jim said you built 2,000 extra seats at the top we didn't need. And now we're contracting, that's now growing to 11,000 seats maybe, right? Between 7 and 11, somewhere in that range, we're thinking. This is just like putting Century High School so far south in the county, not putting Winters a little bit further north in the county. You guys go back and look at these things so we can learn from this, so we don't, 10 years from now, end up way back here, soon to be nicer at that time. That's my question is for you guys to comment.
The question is, how did we get here? Why are we in this shape? And certainly the answer is yes. You go back and review all past decisions, but you have to understand we were constrained during that time. Schools were built where land was available and adjacent. And again, I will incorporate Andy's questions along with enrollment projections in general because, please don't take this as I'm questioning anything, but I will tell you is I've gone through this many, many times, and our enrollment projections, and I've done the analysis, enrollment projections against actuals are almost always right on target, almost always. The only thing that changes because it's a retroactive look forward, it's a regression analysis moving forward where you take the number of births and you take the migration and you project them forward. It's a forward method that is accurate unless there is some major event that causes that trend to change. So get to Andy's question is we were gaining from 1985 to about 2005, 500 students a year. We had, for those of you that may have been parents at that time or around at that time, we had relocatables. We had 121 relocatable classrooms around this county. We were growing faster than we could build schools to accommodate that growth. As Rita said, we had periods of 20 years of unprecedented growth that started around 1985. Our APFOs were put in place too late to slow down the growth. There was, and I'll speak openly about this, there was in leadership positions that felt we shouldn't slow down growth, that worked with developers to ease neighborhoods coming in fast and easy. We struggled as a county, we struggled as towns, and we struggled as a whole entire county to keep up with the growth. Everybody wanted to move to Carroll County, and we had to build school after school after school just to keep up that growth. And we weren't building schools fast enough. And so Andy's question is, okay, why do we build Century Hill? Why do we build this school there? We were looking for any available land to build because the public pressure at that time, and I went to town meetings, and the town meetings were filled with people is saying you need to build now, and you're not building fast enough, and you're not being responsible, and your kids are in relocatables, and they shouldn't be in relocatables, they're not safe there, and all of those things. So the mood was then, the public was saying to us, is build those schools and build them now. Because my child should not be in a relocatable. And so we built 14 schools over that 20-year period. 14 different schools went up, and they weren't fast enough. And so the retro look back is that is not a school system problem, it was a county issue because we were not controlling that growth. That growth was springing up everywhere. Houses, as you know, were inflated. You couldn't get a house in Carroll County, a 3-bedroom house for less than $300,000. Houses were jumping 120% in over a course of the years. They were inflated. People bought more of a house than they could afford. And all of a sudden in 2005, it all stopped and went the other way. And we saw it coming. We saw it coming in the enrollment projections. And I'll talk about Manchester Valley, the elephant on the table. I saw it coming. In 2002, we looked like we were in the North Carroll area. North Carroll High School was at 1850 and looked like they were growing. We put plans forth to redistrict North Carroll students into Westminster, and the North Carroll community said absolutely not. We would rather be in an overcrowded school than come to Westminster. And so the decision makers at that time let that happen. And so North Carroll became more and more overcrowded, and we reached a decision where we couldn't do it any longer. And so we worked with trying to redistrict students or build additions with the North Carroll community. And I'm not speaking anything that's not true. So if you were here from North Carroll, forgive me, but it's absolutely true. I stood up in front of 800 people and said we don't need the school. 2003, 2004, 2005. Those enrollment projections went like this, right back down. And by 2015, we were just barely over capacity in North Carroll. We didn't build the school because of the enrollment projections. We built the school despite the enrollment projections. And so when people say to me, don't make the same mistake, I have a different interpretation of that. So I'm not going to make the same mistake again. And so I appreciate all the input about growth and potential growth, and I'm certainly giving a fair hearing. I'll look at all the documents and make those decisions. But I don't see us growing as a county in the next enrollment cycle, and that's pretty well solid because there's nothing that I know of coming. I don't intend to make any decisions that destroy this county. That is not what I plan to do. I want to provide quality and continue to provide a quality instructional program as well as the board to the students here. And we have to make some very, very tough decisions. And we can debate and argue about where those cuts need to happen and what schools need to be saved, whether it's low enrollment, high capital costs. We can have that public debate. But we cannot have a debate about that we can continue this size population with 43 schools. We just cannot. So Andy, I appreciate the comment. We didn't build 2,000 more. It just happened to be the capacity. We don't build schools to reach 100% of capacity. You know, as well as Mount Airy says, that's 100% is it. 100% we start thinking we need room for growth. So we do overbuild a little bit to allow growth to happen around the county. And one of the charges to the Guthrie Adjustment Committee is we don't want to fill every school up to 100% of capacity. We want to allow room for growth. Any quick follow-up, and I'll go to Kevin in the back.
Yeah, sorry. So Christian mentioned about the discussion, even with common core math, I can figure out that you needed 500 seats, you built 1,250 roughly, right? So we built 700 more than we needed. Why didn't the school board say, we don't want that, school commissioners? You can build that $60 million thing on the hill, but we're not gonna use it. You guys could have said that. You didn't have to take that.
Not we guys, those guys.
I was there, Randy, I was at the table.
But the school board could have said, no, we don't want it.
Yes, they could have.
But they said yes.
Either board could have said no, and I'm telling you, in all honesty, I was there, both boards basically let alone and said build it. I'm sorry, but that's exactly what happened. Staff at the time were recommending we don't need it at this point. And at that point, it moved forward. Right or wrong, here's the problem that I have in regards to that. We can't go backwards, we can only go forward. So we have to take a look at where we are and where we're going, and what do we do to make more right decisions, whether everybody agrees with them or not.
And the premise of your question is, can we look back at, can we not make the same mistake? And the answer is yes, and that was an illustrative example of that.
And it's not as easy as, even the school location. Without talking about any particular one, I can tell you that the Board of Education's recommendation to build certain schools in a certain location was not granted, and we needed land, and we went with our third choice sometimes, because that's where the land was agreed upon to do. So those are the compromise, those are the things that you work through with county government, with us, with everybody.
Right, I know you prefer city services, so that lends into it as well. You don't want wells accepted as possible, so I get that.
Well, it wasn't only that. Let me request one thing, that in all my years of doing this, and I was a part of all 14 of those schools and was in charge of the redistricting committee at the time. And I can tell you on several of those occasions, about half of them. One thing that you don't want to do, and that's starting to happen here, is whatever you say about your school and your community, that's great. But when you start pitting against each other, that's not Carroll County. That's not our school. We don't have a bad school in Carroll County. I recruited teachers for 20 years, and I can honestly say to kids, I don't care where you get a position, you're going to be in a good school. And the school system supports those schools. Some are old, some are new, some have modern equipment, but I can tell you there is not a bad school in Carroll County. So when we start fighting amongst ourselves, that hurts our community. And we're starting to see that in the editorials in the paper. I'm pitting my school against yours and saying we ought to close this one, not that one. Fight for yours all you want, that's great. But try not to do that either, because I think it hurts our system, and I really do.
When I came here, I did not have a specific comment to make, but as I sat listening to some of the things,
Can you speak up a little bit, sir?
I made some notes.
Yeah, might as well.
First of all, Steve, I'd like to thank you for having this meeting tonight. Mr. Dolan, I'd like to thank you for having this meeting. I'd like to also thank the Board of Ed members that came here to listen to what was to be said. Is that better? I will be quick. I am here, and Mr. Dolan, you just touched on my first sentence. I am here to advocate for Wintersville High School. I am not here to speak against any other school. Even though school closures have been a discussion for years, those of us in the Wintersville district were caught off guard because we never figured a school that is 12 years old would be closed. We never figured a school that has been so successful in serving and educating the community would be closed. We never figured an entire feeder system would be destroyed. We never figured so many students, an entire school would be redistricted. We never figured a school with 2 communities now coming online with a projected of 250 homes in our school district because of the water rights being transferred from Wakefield Valley would be considered to be closed. We never figured that the only Title I high school in the county would be redistricted, causing a situation that would obviously lower the threshold at every school at that point, that these children would no longer be served because that criteria is gone. It's not being met at a certain percentage. I would like to ask just two things. For those of you that arrived here this evening that are in the Winters Mill community and have not spoken to me, to please see me before you leave. And last, we only had 4 days because this was new to us. In those 4 days, we have gained or garnered over close to 1,500 signatures on a petition, and at some time we will share that with you. I would also like you to be bold. We've not had the opportunity, and I would like to ask the Winters Mill community to please stand. We are here to be represented. I want to thank our board. I want to thank our
Yes, sir. That's Mike.
Thanks, sir.
My name is Kyle Cooney. I'm a 2014 graduate of Francis Scott Key. Since then, I've attended a 4-year school and already been hired as an employee in Carroll County Public Schools as an assistant in an LFI classroom. So I consider myself fairly involved with the education system. Earlier, you stated that 87% of the school's budget went towards salaries. My question to you, sir, is individuals such as yourself, and not to single you out, make as much as 3 or even 4 full-time Carroll County Public Schools teachers. If you decide these schools need to close, will you take a pay cut?
Let me answer that as president of the Board of Education. I can tell you that the superintendent position, when we talk about competitive salaries and we talk about prevailing wage, I was on a statewide task force last year, appointed by the governor, to look at prevailing wages, particularly in school construction. And our costs have now almost increased 25 to maybe 28% because of a prevailing wage type of thing. I can tell you that every superintendent around here, and your point may be well taken in regards to where our starting salaries are, our superintendent's salary is set by the Board of Education, and it's by far one of the lowest in the entire area, yet our school system has always been one of the best. So I will support what we've done as a Board of Education to hire and retain Mr. Guthrie for the past 5 years. And that's something the board, I'll take that on.
Other questions? None. We just had a Winters Mill. Any? Okay. Yes. You. Yes. You're going to have to stand. I'm sorry.
I live in Petersburg, in one of the gateway communities, and my question is that I lived in Carroll County for 16 years now, and my children were born in Baltimore County. So are you taking the children in these gateway communities that may be born in Frederick County or Baltimore County into your enrollment, or Pennsylvania into your enrollment projections?
The question, in case you didn't hear it, is how do we calculate the births? If births in other counties or other states count? The statistic is from Carroll County parents, regardless of where the birth occurs. That's the statistic that the state gives. So the answer is they're Carroll County parents' births. I have it. Yeah, did that answer? Go ahead.
There is a state, Bill Kane, and I don't know the exact number, but we have a staff member that works closely with the state. And in years in the past, they weren't from, it was like what the average has been in regards to Carroll County. But now working with the unification of all the hospitals and all, they are able to report if you reside in Carroll County. Now, if you move in after your baby's born, then that comes into effect when you enter into kindergarten. And from that point on, it's called cohort survival, that Mr. Guthrie talked about. And basically it just means how many kids survive, which is a terrible way of putting it. How many kids move, and maybe for some kids that was a great year to survive a year, but they move from kindergarten to first to second, and so on throughout. And then that is determined based on that. There's a formula put to that. And I can tell you that from year to year, it's less than 1% countywide being inactive. It's that 99-point-something% accurate. So no, is it ever exact that there's the number of babies? No, but it's a lot better than it used to be, and it's still very accurate with that. And what happened was our baby birth rate went from 2,000 down to 1,600. So what happens is when your 400 start less entering into kindergarten, all of a sudden in first grade, we're now down 800. And it keeps on progressing through because there's 400 less kids moving through each grade. And that's part of where we're losing the 400 kids. It just keeps happening. Plus, we're actually losing that many, or kids in the schools across the county. Now, is there I was just gonna say, an individual school is less accurate with 43 of them than the county as a whole, no question. But the numbers and the projections are based on that, and it's been looked at. We had a study committee a few years ago, looked at 5 different ways of doing it, and the methodology that's being used is absolutely the most accurate. Is it perfect? No, because it's called a projection. You know, it can go up and down regardless if something happens. But the birth rate is what really helps drive that a lot.
Well, and the other factor is, okay, so you have a birth rate to Carroll County parents that we know how many are born, and 5 years later we put them in, 6 years later we put them in school. But Jim is talking about the migration rate, the students that move from one grade to the next. So some of that is just our own Carroll County, and some of that is the migration rate. How many people are moving in to make that not 100% or 102%? Well, when we have no one moving into the county, or very few people moving into the county, or an exodus, then we see a negative number. So it's less than 100% of those students who were in first grade move to second grade, and third grade, and fourth grade, because 2 things. One is people are moving out, or they've aged out of childbearing years, and they're staying in Carroll County. And so in Carroll County, we have an aging population. Our median age continues to go up and up and up. And we're not recycling neighborhoods like we did in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And so that leads to this decline over a number of years in enrollments.
And you know, your kids may come home and say, wow, we had 4 kids move out of our, that I know that moved out, and 4 more move in. There's probably over 2,000 kids a year that move out, and 2,000 move in, and that number stays the same, but we're still going down more than that. And that's the difference. We've always had in and out. Forever and ever, we've had a couple thousand kids move in, a couple thousand kids move out, but it doesn't affect the student enrollment. It's actually going down.
Take a question over here.
Thanks, Mr. Gould. So, since the problem here is essentially growth, can you help us understand if you've looked at the potential impact on individual communities where you're considering closing schools versus that community's ability to contribute growth in the future? The gentleman over here spoke about it earlier with Finksburg. How much focus have you, how much investigation have you done? Because it seems to me that if the problem ultimately is getting more enrollment, attracting more people to the county, that you want to make sure that the areas where you are potentially economically impacting, that you're looking at the right spots.
The answer is yes. Community impact is part of the criteria that you use. You have to look at it if you're going to suggest closing schools as community impact. I think the disagreement is on what that impact is. So the answer is yes, but there may be different standards of impact. Do I look at the number of parents that have to change their daycare? No. Do I look at the number of businesses that could potentially fail? The answer is no. So the impact is different criteria that you're using, because I can't speculate on those things.
You can't look at data about how that community's grown and what is likely to potentially happen over the next 8 to 10 years, because it seems to me if you want to have a whole solution, when the problem is ultimately, because right now all we're talking about is symptoms. The problem is the lack of growth. You would be best served by making sure that you're doing the least possible impact in the future.
Sure. Yes, the answer is yes, although there may be some differences in opinions. Yeah, Pat, you want to follow up?
Thank you. You raised an excellent point. Thank you very much.
It's a good segue.
And first of all, Superintendent Guthrie, you did a great job in your presentations across the county. As you know, I came out in support of you. Mount Airy came out in support of you as well. And also, I think we have a couple county commissioners in the audience, so what I'm about to read is a little bit of history about Mount Airy. I'm approaching this from a different perspective than a lot of our parents. One of my biggest concerns is that Mount Airy is on every option out there. Well, take option 1. We're on 2, 3, and 4. So I'm here tonight on behalf of the citizens, Mount Airy Town Council. We have our Town Council member Bob King. We have our Planning Department chair here. And to urge you in the strongest terms possible to remove Mount Airy Elementary School from the consideration for closure. We truly believe the citizens who have spoken and have raised serious concerns. However, additionally, we want to identify a few issues that are unique to Mount Airy. Closing of Mays will place Pars Ridge at 100% and in the few out years at 108%, therefore causing unwanted overcrowding in the school. This action will initiate our adequate public facilities ordinance that we talked about earlier, and it will stop any growth in Mount Airy, to this gentleman's point. And to Bill's point about our tax base. And it wasn't to say that Mount Airy is a better community, but when you start affecting property values in Mount Airy, you hurt the county disproportionately more. Okay, for many years, Mount Airy suffered with overcrowding and was one of the leading reasons residential growth drastically declined in Mount Airy. During that time, the town put forth tremendous efforts to change our planning progress to address this. It was the establishment of both Mays and Pars Ridge that finally provided a solution to the problem. Closing Mays now would definitely result in the same outcome as before in regards to school capacity. Due to the growth in 90s and at the suggestion of the state, the county, and the Board of Education, we created our adequate public facilities ordinance, which is a test to determine adequate capacity. Shutting down a designated growth area and primary funding area in Carroll County, which is Mount Airy, is our opinion, counterproductive to the vision of not only our town, the state, but also that of the county. As we've talked in recent discussions, we had recent discussions with the county to encourage economic development. It is the intent of the town to continue to work closely with the county, and this will become nearly impossible if you shut down Mays. Abandoning our school now will not only stop growth, including growth that has been planned. You have charts in front of you, Board of Education members, about the growth, our pipeline. We're talking facts and figures here. We're coming to you not from a passionate standpoint, but from a factual one. It will not only force us back into an overcrowding situation, that's from your own charts. 100%, 108%, that's overcrowded. You'll force us back into an overcrowding situation once again where we were 10 years ago, requiring you, the Board of Education, and the county to revisit reopening a new school just as you did before. This is not just reinventing the wheel, but tearing up the plan that we've all worked together to put in place. There are other options. I wish you would look at that. As the planning director just confirmed, we just released a multi-year plan to release more water for increased growth in Mount Airy. That's something you probably didn't know about, but we were controlled by water. We've recently released water for development. I've got 2 more points to make. Many have correctly stated their property values will be impacted, but again, none more so than in Mount Airy. We finally got it right in Mount Airy. We have all worked together to add a school to relieve years of overcrowding at Mays. Combined, we are at a healthy percentage of 78%, and our enrollments will increase. The utilization rate used by the Boundary Adjustment Committee has been changed and has admittedly been arbitrary. For the past several years, the town has also been in extensive discussions with the county and Harrison Leisure. Wrapping up now, our constituents and yours have several other unique reasons why Mays should not be closed. I've heard them, but more importantly, I hope you will hear them. Strictly from an economic growth impact that this gentleman behind me raised, and considering future planning and future capital costs as well, closing Mays is not the right choice for the county or the town of Mount Airy. Thank you.
I'm going to look for it this way. We'll start with you. Already standing and coming up.
Hi. I'm a student at Wintersville, and I'm a junior, and I feel like we needed a student here to represent someone rather than teachers or parents, because we're the ones who are being talked about, and we're the ones who are being redistricted, and my school is possibly being shut down, and I'm not really okay with that. And I understand that there's going to be a problem with everybody, and that nobody wants their school being shut down because that's your home, that's where you feel accepted, that's where you're loved, that's where your friends are, and nobody wants to leave that. But the fact of the matter is that it's going to happen. And for me, Winters Mill is not just a school. Winters Mill is something completely different. We have the most ESOL students, we have the most minority students, and we have the most special needs students. And if my school gets broken up and split apart, then those kids are going to fall through the cracks in the Carroll County school system, and that's honestly an awful thing to happen. Because at Wintersville, we have specialized places for all of these students to go, and we have people who can help them and people who help them succeed in our school. And if they get torn apart and if these people are separated, who knows what's going to happen to them? Who knows what's going to happen to their academic experience? Because everybody deserves that, but the students at Winters Mill who are special and the students at Winters Mill who need our help don't deserve that. So, thank you.
I'll be a little bit shorter than some, but I agree that Carroll County is a true community. We're not just adversaries on the football field or whatever, and we do go and support everybody whenever we go out to all of our sporting events. My concern is you keep mentioning that we have no growth. Location, location, location. Well, I live at the corner of the district of Sandy Mount and Shiloh, which is 2 miles from 2 miles from Westminster High School, 4 miles from Winters Mill High School, and 13 miles from North Carroll. North Carroll is not where I bought my house. I bought my house in Westminster to be in the Westminster and Finksburg community. That's where I work, that's where my kids work. I go to school, we do our shopping. That's where we're centrally located. When I go to sell my house, if I have somebody who says, oh, well, come in, look at this, well, where's your school district? Oh, you have to go all the way to North Carroll, 13 miles away? I'm not gonna get the resale value, and you're not gonna get the people coming in back into the county. So I wanna make sure that that's brought up, that you have to consider people and their circular environment around their homes and not redistrict them to another zip code, if at all possible.
I'd like to piggyback on what the student from Winters Mill said. It's not just what she said about them falling in the cracks. I question whether or not we're actually following the spirit of the regulations of the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland says that we have to consider the fact that Winters Mill has 60 ESOL students, where next door Westminster may have 1 or 2. And we have to consider the impact that it's going to have on the other schools to accommodate that and the financial constraints that are going to happen on them. Are they able to afford to have the software and the teachers and all the resources to accommodate 60 new ESOL students, to be able to accommodate the Title I financial assistance? 23% of Winters Mill falls into that category. So I'm questioning whether educational programs, racial composition of student body, financial considerations, and student relocation is being considered when you put up option 4. Because it's my understanding that the state of Maryland says that these things need to be considered before you propose them. And on the website, no data is there. No data is there. There is no consideration of those things. And I would like to understand how my local school district could propose these things with no data. There should not even be a consideration of option 4 until the data is there. It's an insult to the students, and it's an insult to the state that gives us $113 million for our education system. And I'd like to know why we're poking a $113 million bear.
Thank you. Actually, I can provide some information on that impact that's under COMAR. Actually, that's a holdover from busing, and actually the intent of the racial discrimination is to make sure that all minorities aren't congregated into one school, that there is some distribution Pioneers are on all schools, so it's really the opposite. That's absolutely, that's not the intent of that right there. Wait a second, let me get somebody from that end. Anybody over here? Okay, you? Oh, we haven't heard from New Windsor yet.
Hi, I'm here with New Windsor Middle School. New Windsor Middle School, it's a small school, and it's being proposed that they close it in options 2 and 3. I'm not sure, I haven't had too much time to investigate option 4. I was away over the weekend, so I missed a lot of what was going on. It's in there too. And it's the only middle school under consideration. And I don't know about how the other middle schools are configured, but New Windsor Middle School is the school that has the autism unit for all of the middle schools in the county. Now, the autism unit, the way the school is set up, there are pods, and the autism unit is in one of the pods. And the autism unit, the kids are able to interact with all of the students in the school, but they're also able to stay secluded when they need to be. They're not subjected to large numbers of students going by and disrupting the classroom. And I'm not sure, it's not real clear in the plans what is going to happen to the autistic units if New Windsor closes. Let's see. There's, the other thing is that there's no capital improvements scheduled for New Windsor for 5 years. And 4 of the 5 schools aren't scheduled for modernization before 2024. So you're proposing to close schools that don't need any modernization, that aren't going to need huge amounts of money put into them to have them continue running. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure that that's the best idea to use the county's money to take your car to the junkyard when it's running fine, because in 5 years, you're gonna need, the gas prices are gonna rise and you're gonna need a new transmission and all sorts of work on it. It just doesn't make sense to me that we're closing schools that don't need a huge amount of funding to keep running. And yeah, it also impacts the community of New Windsor, the town of New Windsor, because if we close the school, it's the only school within town limits, and when people are going to look to buy a house, they're going to look at the schools and they're going to go, well, there's no school in this town. There's no school anywhere near this town. That's going to have an impact on whether people are going to be moving into the town. And so, in the real estate market, the people are going to look at that and they're not going to want to purchase real estate. So the housing market in New Windsor could, go down and revenue will decrease. So I'm also concerned that, the kids in that area, we're just not going to get any new kids in there. So that's what I got.
All right, thank you. or comments that will help the conversation other than just statements of feelings. That's my metric for what I'll comment on. I'm not trying to deflect it. So I will answer the question as I am considering everything that everybody says. And I will tell you, in all seriousness, you know, I spent almost my entire career here. I've been in Carroll County since 1982. I love this county. I work here. I met my wife here. I raise children here. I'm here because I want to be here. It is not my intent to have a legacy that destroys this county or does anything to hurt this county, but I have to make decisions for my business and my educational program.
I agree. I'm a business owner, and I'm just telling you that many people, far smarter than me and you in this room, have given you data to show that closing these two schools is exceptional. Financially, that's what we're talking about, detrimental to the county which we all love, we are a part of. So please, will the board recommend an option that doesn't include destroying these two very financially viable options?
Well, it's not to make to be specific on Mr. Guthrie. He's reviewing everything and will make a proposal to the board at a later date. So there's no decision to give you right now. He's gonna take all this, go meet with his staff, and then come back with a recommendation. But I'll point out one observation. We've had 5, and this is not to say whether it's good or bad. We've had, the Boundary Adjustment Committee has recommended 5 closures. We've received over 2,000, maybe more emails, and with the exception of a half a dozen, all 5 communities say, do not close my school for the same reason. I just have to tell you that. Well, my only point of that is not just to point out the reality that no matter what schools were chosen, if there were some, that community would be against closures. And that's a good thing. As someone said at one of our meetings, wouldn't it be terrible if your school was going to close and you didn't care at all? I mean, everybody cares for that, and that's a positive thing. But in regards to what Mr. Guthrie has and the staff to bring a recommendation to us, it's taking all that into consideration. That's why you notice we're having another work session. Whatever will come out, it goes back out for more comments. And so it's an open dialogue.
Mr. Guthrie cannot recommend an option he doesn't have.
That's the same option, so you asked for more options.
Well, again, and we're beyond, now we're debating options, and that's not the intent of this meeting, is to hear input. Bev, I thought I saw your hand up, yeah.
Like you, I've spent my career in Carroll County. I'm on year 26. I've taught at 3 different high schools, 3 different So, I have children or graduates and currently in school, so I'm invested in this discussion on all kinds of levels. So like some of the other speakers, I would encourage you to look at other options, including restructuring of schools and grades. We all know how important high schools are to individual communities. And as I attend these meetings and I hear parents talk about concerns sending their 5 and 6-year-old babies on 35-minute bus rides. So again, I would urge you, as you consider all your options, to look at different grade configurations. Lots of other areas do it, and they do it successfully, so that we don't have to necessarily close high schools or close elementary schools. Now, obviously, I do, however, want to add, I think some redistricting at the high schools absolutely has to happen. We have 1A schools struggling to offer programs, while other high schools in the county have portable sit-downs. So, some shifting in the entire county, because when you look at those maps, there are some sections of the county, 1 student moves, 2 students move, and others have 70% of their students move, or 100% of their students move. So as a county problem, I'd like to see the whole county involved in solutions.
My husband and I were raised in Baltimore County, and we came to Carroll County because we wanted to be in this area. We chose Winters Mill as our feeder school district, but all of the schools in the county are great, and they're all important. My question is actually more for the parents. I'm finding a lot of things on Facebook and Twitter that are completely inappropriate coming from one school to another. And I'm just asking that you please we all need to be treated with respect. Stop your kids from, in essence, bullying. And, you know, I truly hope that none of us have to get closed down, but obviously that's not going to happen. But we are all great schools, we are all great people, and we should be supporting each other and the county.
Yes.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Sure.
I grew up in Northern Virginia. It was always growing too fast. I had classes in portables, I had roofs that were leaking over my English class, all of that, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. My question, I have three and they're short, I hope. My question is, isn't there a more graceful way to scale down without a drastic closure? The idea of reconfiguring grades and what holds a school or what the school is used for. If a wing of a school were used differently where the kids could still go there, is that ever an option? That's my question one. I'm also a nonprofit consultant. This is what I do for a living. And a lot of nonprofit organizations have faced the same issue of declining state funding for their programs. It's just a fact of nonprofits right now. What I've been working with them on, and everybody is doing this, is finding replacement funding. You have to find replacement funding. You can't count on the state to fund your homeless shelter or your substance abuse recovery program, et cetera. It's just not there. Is there any new revenue stream being considered in the county? Question number 2. Question number 3 has to do with Title I students and where low-income students live. I can appreciate where the money comes into Carroll County, but as a resident of Union Bridge, where a lot of low-income students are, and I know that New Windsor Middle serves Union Bridge, Tawnytown has a lot of low-income students. Looking at combining the two low-income communities into one, these are the very kids that need a local school, the very kids that need smaller classrooms, the very kids that need a little more to make it. Have you considered the negative return on investment of providing kids who need that extra with less, with crowding them into one school, 2 low-income communities into one crowded school? Those are my 3.
Okay, the first question was, along with Bev's question, is can you consider grade configurations as a way, although I didn't get a sense from you that you were interested in closing schools, simply just reconfiguring grades and making use of space. So I'm not going to, certainly we can consider balancing enrollments. That's not going to save us any money. In fact, it would cost probably more money in transportation. The second question of alternative or replacement funding, public school funding is pretty much structured in law. So there's really no opportunities for replacement funding in the amount of money we're talking about, the millions and millions of dollars. School funding has 3 sources. State funding, which is based on formula, wealth, and let me talk about that for a second. Carroll County gets a double hit on state funding because there's 2 calculations that take place because of the adequate and equitable state changes that were made in 2002, which we benefited at first, but now it's a detriment. First of all, is the one that you all know, the number of students enrolled in Carroll County Public Schools on September 30th dictates how much money we get in that side of the formula. The second side of the formula is wealth, relative wealth. And that also, although it backs into enrollment, because relative wealth is net taxable income. Okay, the county's net taxable income, all individual households, added to assessed value of property. So you get that total figure. And then you divide it by the number of students that you have, and you have the wealth per student. And all the state does is simply line up the wealthiest to the least wealthy on a per student basis. So if you're in a declining enrollment, then you know that you'll appear more wealthy or relatively more wealthy than other counties because the numbers are higher. The wealth looks higher than other counties who are growing. And so we're hit twice with the same piece. So that's what leads to the decline in state revenue. There's a committee called the Adequacy Committee that's meeting at the state level that we in Carroll County have representatives on, that's looking at that formula to see if there's any changes that can be made. Unfortunately, we were unable to get legislation passed in the General Assembly the last 2 sessions that would have given us a hold harmless. Other counties were able to get that hold harmless, we were not, and so we are experiencing a $2 million increase roughly per year for all those years. The second revenue stream is the county, and that also has 2 factors to it. The amount of revenue available in the county and the county commissioner's priority. Those are the 2 factors. The third and less important to the overall picture is federal funding to I think about $13 million a year, but that's all targeted money for specific programs. In other words, we have to spend it on specific programs like Title I, which was mentioned several times in here, and other targeted programs. That's what we get that money for. Special education is another one of those. So unfortunately, there's no other avenues for replacement funding in the dollar amount that we would need to be sustainable. To give you a sense of what that is, and talk about the biggest expenditures we've talked about a number of times, employee salaries. Employee salaries for what Mr. Dolan called a step increase, in other words, an incremental increase in employee salary because of the year of experience. For every employee costs about $5 million for 1 step. Percent COLA is about $2 million. And it's not just a one-time expense. If you layer on a step and a 1%, that's $7 million expenditure every year. And that's not increasing. That's just, okay, you pay $7 million one year, you got to pay it the next year and the next year and the next year. And of course there's inflationary impacts on that as well. So those costs do go up. So we're talking about a significant amount of money that I don't know of any replacement source that would be able to be sustainable in that amount of money and more. So, yeah, follow up quickly.
Why doesn't Carroll County have any charter schools?
Carroll County did have a charter application from Sustainable Futures, and the board did approve the application 2 years ago. They were a Montessori elementary school. They failed to get sufficient student enrollment to be viable, and so they decided to surrender their charter just at the last board meeting. I can only answer that generally charter schools come into effect when a large number of people are dissatisfied with the education that they're receiving. Charter schools are more prevalent in urban areas, although Frederick County has 3, I think. So I can't answer that question other than say we did have one. They weren't able to attract enough students to financially meet their capital costs. Okay, let's go over here. Yes, sir. Neil, come on up.
Superintendent, thank you, and Coach Doolin. It's been a few years since I called you that, but and board members, thank you for this opportunity tonight. I'm going to echo quite a few things that have already been mentioned, but as a lifelong resident and mayor of New Windsor, this is very personal. I'm very passionate about this. However, I do have some things that I would like for you and the board to consider. Projected new housing, as the gentleman over here had said, New Windsor, probably within the next 5 to 10 years, will have 110 new homes. Union Bridge, our neighboring town, has approved 183 homes. Now, I can't say for sure when that will be built, but sooner or later. But just those almost 300 homes, I feel, would have an impact on all of the 3 schools, Key, Elmer Wolf, and New Windsor, and whether or not that has been considered. Especially since in 2024, we're not that far away from being adequate levels. So I think it's 47 students, and with that type of housing, I think we could meet that. As the young lady over here said, look at what, not just losing one school in New Windsor, but losing the only school in New Windsor, what kind of social impact that will have in our community. I take that very personal. And also, as she mentioned, the housing market. Young couples looking for a house to buy, definitely look at schools. And when they see that there's no school in New Windsor, they're moving to somewhere else to look. And that will definitely hurt our housing market in New Windsor. Also, I would ask whether or not you have looked into multi-use of schools. And in this case, closing maybe a wing of New Windsor Middle or any other of the other schools, and allowing perhaps the town of New Windsor to have their government offices in there, maybe the library, not headquarters, but library, a public library to serve Union Bridge, New Windsor. Other businesses possibly could come in and use that. It is, to my understanding, allowable by the state school board or system. It probably has not ever been done in the state of Maryland, but I would like for you to at least consider that. That would, of course, lower the seats and increase the utilization rate. The other thing, New Windsor Middle opened with 5th grade in it. And I think it was one of the last schools to have 5th grade. Whether or not you would look to consider that, or Sandy Mount or any of the schools to consider another grade. Of course, we're the only middle school, so this would really affect, to bring 5th grade back to New Windsor to increase the enrollment. So just a couple options. I know everybody likes to complain about the situation, but I'd like to think that I can come up with solutions as an elected official. I always love to hear that. So again, thank you for everything you do.
I know you've been waiting.
Thank you. I'm the mother of 3 Carroll County Public School children. Much more importantly, I am the daughter of a 30-year high school English teacher from Fairfax County. I'm greatly encouraged by all of the schools that have come out to support their kids, not only their kids, but also their faculty. The 2 points that I want to make are not specific to a school. As I understand it, the timeline was that you had asked for a boundary adjustment committee to make recommendations, and those are presented September 9th. I may be slightly off, but September 9th, I think, was the date for the recommendations.
Right. We commissioned them in February. Right?
Yeah, commissioned in February. 6 days ago, an option was presented that had 0 data except for one big fat price tag. Tonight, all I have heard, for the most part, is enrollment and money, and I get it. I know you have to pay teachers. I really do get it. I do think that there should be an equitable treatment for all options, meaning that no option should be public without the same level of data being provided. For there to have been, and I would say that was Guthrie, Sandy Mount, Charles Carroll, I don't care what school it is, for there to have been a public meeting where every line was TBD, 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 and they were supposed to be using the same information that they had for 8 months to make the first 2 recommendations. But that big $70 million price tag looks really attractive, which is just taking the $40 million renovation from East Middle and tacking it on to turning Winters Mill into a middle school. Sir, I would just submit to have been totally blindsided as a community, to not have the same amount of data to be treated equitably for any school, and then for teachers in that meeting to see a floor plan colored in with their rooms showing these would be the classrooms for East Middle. Well, this half of the building we don't know what to do with. I mean, wouldn't that seem to be jumping the gun just a little when you don't have the data to publicly be able to support your premise?
We did say that at the meeting, that this was not
What?
a fully fleshed out, and that fully.
It was
I know that
not equitable.
I understand that.
So, it was not an equitable treatment. And I would be up here cheering for any other school that was in the same exact position. The same level of transparency should be applied to every option. No parent should be able to weigh in on an option that is not substantiated with public data. I would say, would say there are 8 criteria that the state says have to be considered, which I know you've addressed in the documents that I have read. The only 2 that are highlighted in the summary of options, which is on the website, relate to enrollment and enrollment-related factors and money. The fact that educational programs serving low-income children, racial composition, which, sir, I have to say, as the mother of a Latina daughter, to hear you say that the spirit of the racial composition issue is to ensure that there is not a majority of minorities at any one school is offensive. We've had lots of folks up here speaking, and I've raised my hand from the beginning.
Yeah, let her speak.
And what I'm saying is that I'm very proud that our school is the only nationally ranked high school with the highest percentage of minorities at our school. Those students that would be bused to much further schools add great value to our community. They don't add dollars. They don't add dollars. But that doesn't mean that they should count less.
Okay.
And I know that you would agree, and I know you're in an impossible position with me standing here. Thanks for calling on me.
Certainly, let me address your comments, and I thank you for being frank with me. I certainly meant no offense. I was trying to give a background, however ill-advised it may have been. My apologies. I certainly meant no offense, but the background of that COMAR revision was in the time period when students were being bused and the state wanted to avoid having any particular closing of schools have one school become the minority school. That's the background that I was trying to share. No disrespect to any of you, and I apologize for any offense that it may have caused you. That was not my intent. So that's certainly, thank you for your comments.
Thank you. I'm coming at this a little differently because I live in an area that isn't going to lose a school.
Okay.
But I will be affected by the redistricting plan for my kids that go to school. My question is, for Runnymede and Northwest Middle, if you close New Windsor, Northwest takes in obviously some more kids.
Mm-hmm.
If you close Charles Carroll, Runnymede takes in more kids. According to plans I've seen for Tawnytown, they're supposed to build 2 new housing developments. Has that been accounted for with the numbers so that we don't get into the situation that we now have overcrowding and you moved kids in and then need to move them back out?
The question is yes.
Okay.
Our planner does work with the planner at the county. We know where their housing developments are. We know what the potential yield is. So that is not a direct factor in the enrollment projections because we count students and seats, but it's certainly part of the average.
I was just curious because my kid's going to be affected by this, and it seems kind of pointless to close schools, move them all around to build new houses, and then move them all back out.
Right.
So, and my other question, which I don't know if has ever been mentioned, what are you going to do with the schools? Oh, sorry. What are you going to do with the schools that you close? You're planning on, I assume, to sell them? Would they become office space? How does that save money for the empty buildings? That's it.
The 2 questions, in case you didn't hear, was one on planning, and we've heard a number of people talk about developments. In planning stage or actually further along, does that take place? Is that part of the enrollment projections? It isn't directly, no, but certainly our planner talks to the county planner. We know where those developments are. But whether or not those developments actually happen, their planning stage, we see a lot of developments in the planning stage where no houses are built. So it is a factor, but it is not a direct factor. The second question, can you repeat that second question again? Oh, the buildings, yes, the buildings. Actually, the way that it works is if the school closes, we declare them surplus. And the county, first they would go, there was a question on charter schools. Are there any charter schools that would be viable to use that building? If there's none, they go to the county and the county makes a decision on what to do with them. That's not within the purview of the school
So
system.
there's a possibility that these new schools, like New Windsor, who's only about 10 years old, can be brought down to the ground.
I don't know the answer to that
Possibility
question.
there.
I don't know the answer to that
You're
question.
already thinking on a theory level that we're suggesting that the probability of growth is not going to reach where we want it to be, because it's all in theory, is what you're trying to tell everybody. We're guessing that we're going to have growth and we're going to need this school.
And no, I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm saying is the enrollment projections for the last 10 years have showed a steady decline in enrollment across the county, and for the next 10 years are showing that same decline. I'm not in theory saying anything other than what the enrollment projections are showing.
So we're going to make two towns, New Windsor and Union Bridge, be trucked 20 miles and have these little kids sit in these buses for 20 to 30 minutes longer. And then down the road is we're going shopping into Westminster and see that school being demolished. All that money that went in to put that school there, and you don't even seem to blink it eye.
I've not made any recommendations yet. In the blue. Oh.
He doesn't trust me. So I was just curious, there's another issue, the workforce. First year teacher, do the first, second, third year teachers, should they start looking for other jobs, or how does that work?
Okay, good question. Should we close 5 schools under that scenario? What happens to the teachers? Teachers follow the students. No, we hire teachers based on the number of students. Other than the normal number of teachers that we would need less of because of less students, there would be no direct layoffs associated with the transfers because teachers would follow the students.
So you just said that the bulk of the salary is 80% of your cost, so I was wondering if that, you're saving costs on employees,
No,
faculty, janitors, that kind of thing.
the cost savings are really due to the core staff in the building, of which the teachers are not a part of.
Quick question just about the option 4. I mean, I know it was recently just presented and it wasn't an option that the committee came up with. Why wasn't it presented at that meeting without all the data? And when is that going to all be available so we can actually see all those numbers?
The board asked for that option to be considered and brought back to the committee. The communication to the public, which I was trying to say is fully well. We said that this isn't completely fleshed out. This was a skeleton of information. The board did ask to see another scenario that included the capital cost at East Middle being moved away, and what would be the possibility on the skeleton basis would it look like if we moved those East Middle School students to Winters Mill.
All the boards, can the board answer the question?
Sure, I'll be glad to do that in regards to that. What happened was, the dialogue that occurred for the board was, and from everyone that we received emails from, exactly what we're doing here, there may be another option after this, who knows? But that was put upon the board to look at, otherwise you'd have had 1 and 2. And so with 3 and 4, it was taking in the community input, looking at it and saying, are there other alternatives to maybe look at in regards to that? And that's why also there was no vote to move forward. There's a work session to get into more depth with 3 and 4, and the Boundary Adjustment Committee will bring back more concrete data to the work session on the 26th, particularly in options 3 and 4, so that before that, would anything ever go out, all that data that people have requested that they did on 1 and 2 would exist if 3 and 4 were to move forward. So it's part of the work process. It's not like it's a done option. It was developed out of the dialogue from the communities in regards to that.
Will option 5, 6, and 7 be presented at the next one as well?
I don't know that at this point. I mean, that's,
Well, but it's just, we're starting to take a very good meeting and turn it into shouting back and forth, and I do not want to do that. The answer to the question was expressed. The board asked for an option 4. We have not received another option request from the Board of Education. So the work session, I'm not going to be bringing forward any more options that the board requested. I may have some of my own, but the board hasn't requested one. And we are in the process of trying to explore other opportunities for other schools, which are asking us to do, and condemning us at the same time for doing it. So we spent 8 months developing options 1 and 2, and several weeks developing other options. So you have to take the good with the bad. If you want us to explore other options in other schools, we are not going to have the time to dedicate to those options that we did the first 2. So the information is going to be incomplete. You can't ask us to come up with other options and expect the same kind of analysis it took 8 months to get on the other options. It is going to be a skeleton framework of options if other schools are involved, and then we'll get the sense from the board, do we want to follow this option and fill in the missing information? I will not recommend closing a school that isn't fully fleshed out with proper, all of the to be announced or to be determined filled in before we put it up for public comment. I mean, I'm not going to do that, but you have to allow the process to take place for other schools to be considered in at least a skeleton way to say to the board, this is a possibility of what it could look like. So you can't, I mean, I guess you can, but it's unrealistic to expect us to explore other options and not give us the opportunity to do that publicly. You have to understand also, all conversations about this with the board have to occur in public. We can't do this in the back room. So what you see is what the board sees at the same time. So allow that process to work, and don't condemn us for looking at other options, which you've asked us to do, without taking the time to fully explore it and see if this trail leads to something that we want to do, or no, we're going to wipe that out, and here's another school that we want to consider. Here's some basic information, you want us to consider that as well. That's the public process that we're in. And so there may be other schools that are going to be showing up at the next meeting saying, our school was mentioned and we just found out about it. That's because we are in a public process as we look at other schools. So if you want us to look at other schools, you're going to have to accept the fact that we need to take this one step at a time. Yes?
We're not really, my family and I, we're not even really affected because we got out of district zoning. So, but I came here because it's important for everyone, even though we would be going back to the original school where we came from. So, but I want to apologize for everyone. I do. All the pride and the passion, and you had made a comment about Carroll County, and that's not what we do, but what did you think would happen when you threw it out there out front? I mean, it's survival of the fittest, and it's like Thanksgiving dinner, and all the turkeys are like, you know, go cut the head off of that turkey. So you had to know that this was going to come. So we're not, in talking about solutions, we're not, so the question I have one is that, and this is done because Baltimore County, I'm from Baltimore, and we moved out here because the school that we were zoned in Baltimore County was just deplorable. And I would have had to private school both my daughters in Baltimore City, which is another idea that I did not want to fathom. So we just had to move. And Carroll County was perfect because my business was out there, and I love the whole concept of the public school system where all the kids go to the schools, the athletic ones, the smart ones, the artsy kids, the gifted ones, the musical ones, and that's what public school system is. So that's what I loved about it. So the question I have is now we're trying to save schools. Well, we're not. We're trying to save budgets. So one of the things that I don't understand is that if we're such a big community, why not do a special fund to say, hey, you know, it sucks, but how do we just suck it up and kick in $10 million as a county and pay for the Manchester Valley? You know, we all kick in and we'll just knock that out. 25% of our deficit's wiped out as a whole county to help pitch in. But then we have the teacher stuff. But I mean, tough times call for tough times. But that's just an option. See, we're not here
we need to figure out options on how to move forward, not just figure out how to not do it. We have to figure out. So one of the things is, why not create more magnet programs in the public schools, which will let you draw from outside the county, which will raise up the numbers. Like creative gifted things. Because the concern I have is this: if you cut if you close these schools down, what you're doing, and you had mentioned, you said that all the experienced teachers are leaving, right? So here's what's happening. You even said all the experienced teachers are leaving, so we're going to overpopulate all the schools while all the experienced teachers leave, and expect these young teachers who are underpaid anyway to then say, teach 30 plus kids following Maryland's core standard, which says we can only go as fast as the slowest kid left behind, and then expect more funding from the state, and then the cycle begins again new next year. And then what's going to happen, I can tell you, is the private schools are going to show up. And then you're going to have charter schools and private schools, because the parents are going to say, I'm not sending my kid to that school. Are you kidding me? The grades are down, the attendance down. I want to send them to a private school. And then they're going to start going out of the county. Then the charter schools, because they're all for-profit, are going to come into the county. And now you're going to have more kids leaving the public school system, which means your numbers are going to go down even more, which means 3 years from now you're going to have the same conversation saying, yeah, I know we just built FSK, but you know what? We'll just build bigger buses. And then, so we will then say, well, let's go crazy, and then we'll build box stores at every intersection in Carroll County, and we'll drive up economics. Does that sound about right, how it goes?
I'm not sure I follow.
So the solutions, so the question is that once we do this, like, what have you guys talked about how do you deal with the private school situation? Because it has to be, you're the Board of Education, you have to deal with, how do we stop that from happening? And then two, I mean, if 87% of your budget is, I think you said education, how is Carroll County not driving the entire state in education if so much is dedicated to education?
Well, let me
Why
start.
are we last?
Last?
Or at the bottom that you guys say and everything? I don't understand that.
We never said we're
So, I don't, that's just.
Well, let me ask some of the answerable questions. You asked, because there were a lot of leaps there, but one of the answerable questions is why can we build magnet schools and draw students in from other?
No, not magnet schools, just programs in the schools, which will allow the schools to increase attendance by special programs.
Well, first of all, we can't draw students from other counties.
Well, you can if you have a program that no other school in the area provides. Like Hargrave, Stevens, Houston, Western Second,
Right now, I don't have enough funds, so it's sort of car driving the horse. I don't have enough funds to even fund our current instructional programs in the way they should be. And certainly, magnet programs are more expensive because of the specialized equipment, specialized teachers. I'm having trouble even keeping the current programs afloat. So we would need revenue to do what you want to do, which I don't have, is the whole reason that we're looking at, one of the reasons that we're looking at school closures. So that's sort of a theoretical argument that I can't make because I don't have the revenue to support what we have now as enhancing it. If I had the revenue to enhance things, I certainly would. Yes?
A little while ago, you talked about when you're choosing a school that you don't take into consideration the businesses in the area or the daycare. And then what my question falls under with the COMAR regulations, that several of the key points is you're talking about not breaking up the community within a natural boundary such as 21048, where we don't have we're the only elementary school. We're the only school in the area, in our boundary. So if you're breaking up that, which then falls back on the businesses, because the businesses rely on our fundraisers coming out to their businesses, our stores, our shopping centers, and I'm sure it happens in the other areas too. So my question is, I don't understand if these 8 regulations are set forth, or recommendations for closing the schools, why are those not taken into consideration? I think I heard somebody mention, I don't know if it was New Windsor, that they only have 2 of those areas that they're touched on, or whatever schools. Why is it that Sandy Mount we're not really falling under any of those 8 categories? So I don't understand why you're not using those recommendations.
the Boundary Line Adjustment Committee's report has those factors for each school they're recommending for closure. So I don't know if you reviewed that. They're there. They're included.
We're not seeing where our area factors into under any of those recommendations.
Well, the committee did make an effort to address all of the areas in that report that fall under the COMAR provisions. And let me talk to daycare, because that came up in another comment, is when I said I can't take into consideration things like daycare, I have, of the hundreds and hundreds of emails that I get, a lot of people are telling me their personal inconveniences as a result of school closure. And I have to drive 10 more minutes to my daycare, or my work is the other way and my daycare is over here. And in all honesty, everybody is saying something different. I cannot take those when I make my recommendation. I have to be honest with you, I can't consider those kinds of things, because it affects every family differently. And if I tried to put that as a factor in, it would just be mind-boggling, and somebody would always be disadvantaged. So that's when I said daycares and things like that. That's really what I meant.
Well, to follow up on that, I was in daycare. I was in daycare for 15 years, and they're regulated by the state, so they can only have so many children. So if you're redistricting all these children, and okay, maybe parents are going to be inconvenienced by taking them to a different, 10, 15 minutes out of the way, but there may not be spots available. You can't just snap your fingers and say, hey, we want to add 40 more seats to our before and after school program. If the square footage does not allow that, they can't take those children. So then you have to think about where are all those children going to go. So that should fall into consideration. What are you going to do with these before and after school children? You can't have them go by themselves. So what are the families?
I'll just stand by my statement. It's not a factor that I would take into consideration, the location of all the daycares, because it is so diverse throughout the communities. You may disagree with that, and you certainly are entitled to, but that's not something I'm going to take into consideration. We're at 9 o'clock. We are going to end at 9. You'll have plenty of opportunities. I'm going to take one more comment, and that's going to be this gentleman here, and he'll have the last word.
I'm in accounting and finance. I understand you have a revenue problem. I'm in accounting and finance. I can't put myself in your shoes, but let me tell you about my experience. I've done brick and mortar analysis to close over 100 sales offices. It's not the same as closing an elementary school. It doesn't even come close. But when I propose my options for a closure, I have all the data available as a single unit, not as a group of units. I know my operating costs, I know my revenue breakage, I know my offsetting costs. I would never represent an option without presenting all the data so you can make an educated choice.
You haven't done that.
I know, I'm saying your committee has not given you all the data so you can make a recommended choice. So I think you need all that information as a single unit, not as a group of units, which, by the way, you put the committee together back in February. You didn't have clear parameters for them. So all these other options are just variables of the same option.
That's right.
So I just recommend sit back, look at each unit, know your total costs, and look at each one. Does it make sense to close that school? Thank you.
I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you for the passion.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I have patiently waited. I'm a mom of 4. This is important to me. You have all these people here that want to have a dialogue with you. So can you
Yes, I do understand that. Once I make my recommendation,
Your recommendation, we are here as a community to help you. It's not just your recommendation. All I've heard tonight from you is my decision, my recommendation. We're here, we want to help, we want to partner, so please.
we have set up 8 hours of hearing time. We said we're going to go from 7 to 9. I'm sticking by that. There'll be plenty of opportunity for you to input information once the recommendation is made and we go out for public comment. I'm not, no, this,
We are here now.
yes, There were plenty of opportunity.
No, I didn't get an opportunity.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate you being here. I am going to close the meeting now. Thank you.